Chapter 63. This venerable one sees whom? This version of Lin'An city was deeply embroiled in war. Congealing blood covered the ground as far as the eye could see, and they were surrounded by crumbled walls and ruined houses. The trees and greenery had withered away, suffocated by the heavy miasma of malicious ghosts. Moran hadn't yet collected himself before he heard some strange sounds and looked up. Not far away, fresh entrails hung from the branch of an old pagoda tree, and a dozen crows had set upon them to feast as blood and flesh dripped from them non-stop. Underneath the tree lay a corpse of a middle-aged man, blood and organs spilled out from where his stomach had been torn open by claws. No one would ever know if he had died with his eyes open or closed, as his eyeballs had been pecked away. Moran was no stranger to such scenes. In his past life, he had once crossed the breadth of the mortal realm to put all 72 cities of Rufang's sect to the sword. When he did, blood had flowed like rivers, and corpses had lain strewn over the fields, amounting to a sight much like this one. Yet, for some reason, he couldn't understand, even though he had reveled in the blood he had spilled in that life, and even though it had made every fiber of his being sing. Now, laying eyes on a similar scene of devastation filled him instead with a biting sympathy. Had he been faking docility for so long that his true nature had, without his knowledge, changed? As he pondered, he heard the sound of hoofs ahead, accompanied by a cloud of dust. Anyone galloping around in such war-torn times was probably bad news. Moran yanked Chewanning behind himself, but there was nowhere to hide on this barren old road. A group of riders swiftly emerged from the dust cloud, some dozen in all. When they got closer, it was apparent that their horses were the opposite of sturdy. A few were so starved that their ribs protruded. The riders were dressed in a uniform style, white attire with bright red patterns and helmets embellished with feathers in like colors, and each had donned a circlet of entwining dragons. The clothes were stained yet tidy, and the people were thin but spirited. Even more unusual was the fact that each of them carried a bow and a full quiver of arrows on their backs. In times of war, the two most valuable things were food and weapons. These were plainly not ordinary people. Moran was still trying to decide if the new arrivals were good or evil, friend or foe, when one among them, a youth of only 14 or 15, cried out in horror, "Dead! Dead!" The youth stumbled off his horse and fell to the muddied ground below, but he scrambled up and staggered toward the tree, where he threw himself on the mangled body of the middle-aged man, crying miserably, "Dead! Dead!" The other riders wore expressions of pity, but they had all undoubtedly seen too much death already, so much so that they had numbed to it. While the youth held the corpse and cried in agony, no one deigned to get off their horse to offer him comfort. One of the riders noticed Moran and Chewanning standing not far away. He was startled for a moment before asking in a thick Lin'An accent, "You two aren't from around here, are you?" "Yeah," Moran answered. "We're from the Sichuan region." "That far away?" The asker was shocked. "These days, the world is full of ghosts as soon as night falls. How have you two survived this far?" "I can fight a bit." Moran knew it would be the best to reveal as little as possible, but since these people didn't seem to be malicious, he pulled Chewanning out to change the subject. "This is my younger brother. We were passing by and stopped to rest for a while." Some of the riders seemed a touch taken aback by the sight of Chewanning. A couple turned to whisper amongst themselves. "Something wrong?" Moran asked, alarmed. "It's nothing," said the young man at the head of the group. "But on to serious matters. You should go to the city if you want to rest. There may not be any monsters around right now, but once night falls, ghosts will be crawling through the streets. Shaman's adoptive father came out looking for food during the day yesterday, but there was a thunderstorm and he couldn't make it back before the sun set, so…" He sighed heavily and didn't finish. Shaman was the name of the wailing youth, and the corpse under the tree was his adoptive father. Such occurrences were commonplace in these chaotic times. Someone in a family would go out looking for food and be perfectly fine as they left in the morning, only to never return come nightfall. Even knowing that these events were already 200 years past, Moran felt a tightness in his chest as he watched the youth cry so miserably that it seemed he was about to weep blood. This was followed by a sudden unease. Had he grown soft? He'd hardly blinked when killing people in his last life. Moran grabbed Chuaning and bid the group farewell. "When you get to Linan City, find somewhere to stay for a while," the leader said. "We're planning to relocate everyone to Putua soon, where an abundance of spiritual energy has warded off the ghost's invasion, at least for the time being. You should come with us rather than traveling with just the two of you." "Relocate?" "That's right." The leader's eyes sparked to life, and even his face seemed to light up. "It's all thanks to Chugong's brilliant plan. Everyone in the city, from the elderly to the infants, would get to keep their lives. But enough chatter. We still have to patrol the border before it gets dark, see if we can find any more survivors to bring back. Aye, Shaman, come on, we should go." Yet Shaman continued to cry, clutching his father's corpse without turning around. Moran sighed and tugged at Chuaning's hand. "Let's go to the city first," he said quietly. Chuaning nodded, but suddenly asked, "Do you think they managed it in the end?" The small hand in Moran's felt a little cold. "Do you want the truth or a lie?" "The truth, of course." "The lie would be better for a little kid." So Chuaning answered his own question. "They didn't." "That's right. See, you already knew the answer, but you still had to ask, as if that would change the outcome." Chuaning ignored that. "Do you know why they didn't make it out?" "It's not like I'm some 200-year-old demon. How would I know?" Chuaning fell silent for a while. 200 years ago, he said gloomily. Practically everyone in Linan City died. Moran was silent. Only a few escaped. "Wait, Shidi, you're so young. How do you know so much?" Chuaning shot him a glare. The Yuheng elder reviewed this in history lessons more than once. You decide not to pay attention in class, then turn around and ask me how I know things? How despicable. Moran was speechless. "Sure, I spaced out in class, but even my own shizun didn't scold me. What are you lecturing me for?" Then again, there was no point in arguing with the kid, so he let it slide. The pair headed toward the city, chattering along the way, and before long arrived at the city gates. The ancient city stood tall on the bank of the Qiangtang River and was easily fortified against ghosts and demons, with defensive structures lining the walls and the perimeter. Corpses bearing curse marks lay piled outside the city. Such remains, if not taken care of, would reanimate at night. Cultivators had gathered outside to spread incense ash on the corpses while the sun was high in the sky and the young energy was strong. For the bodies afflicted with especially strong curses, they performed exorcisms using talismans upon which they drew with wine-dipped cinnabar. A pair of guards stood before the spiked defensive frames by the city gates, dressed just like the riders they had met earlier, with white attire trimmed in red and twin dragon circlets, as well as bows on their arms and a full quiver of arrows on their backs. "Halt! Identify yourselves!" Moran repeated his story from earlier. The guards weren't there to refuse anyone entry, only to register new arrivals, so they were let through after putting their names down. Before leaving, Moran remembered that the riders had mentioned a Chugongse. Since the relocation was this Chugongse's idea, the fellow had to be crucial to breaking the illusion. "Sorry to bother you, sir, but might I inquire about someone?" Moran asked. The guard looked at him. "Aren't you from Sichuan? You know someone here?" Moran smiled. "No, but we met some sentry gentlemen who mentioned a Gongse by the name of Chu, the one who's going to take everyone to Putuo City in 2 days. I was wondering who this Chu Gongse was. I know a bit of magic and wanted to see if I could help in some way." The guard looked Moran up and down and seemed to decide that he must have skill to have been able to bring a little kid all the way here without mishap. "Chu Gongse is the eldest son of the Lord Governor. The Lord Governor was killed a month ago when the Ghost King descended, and the Gongse has led us since." "The Governor's son?" Moran and Chuaning exchanged a glance, then Moran turned to ask, "That's strange. How does the Governor's son know magic?" "What's so strange about that?" The guard glared at Moran. "Since when was there a rule that you have to be in a big sect to cultivate, that the common people can't do it?" Moran fell silent. Sure, there were independent cultivators, but they never amounted to anything. It made Moran wonder whether this amateur Chu Gongse and his half-baked plan was what had gotten everyone in Lin'An killed. As they followed the guard's directions toward the governor's residence, Moran soon realized how wrong he was. This esteemed personage, who just so happened to share a name with the shizun, was inarguably no amateur. He saw a Changjing barrier. A Changjing barrier was a powerful variety of barrier formed of purified energy that was capable of warding off all evil. As long as this barrier stood, even 1,000-year-old malicious spirits couldn't hope to pass it, much less the average ghost. This barrier required the caster to remain within its range in order to ground the spell, and it protected a relatively small area. Even a mighty Zhongzhi like Chuaning could only cover about half of Xixing Peak with one. Right here and now, this Chu Gongse of 200 years ago had erected a Changjing barrier that covered a radius of 10 miles around the governor's residence. Although a far cry from Chuaning's capabilities, it was certainly far from an ordinary achievement. Moran and Chuaning headed toward the gates of the residence. Moran intended to try his luck and have someone notify the Governor Gongse that a cultivator was offering help. He wanted to see if the man would be willing to show them the courtesy of a personal meeting. However, when they turned the corner, they were met with the unexpected sight of 3 long lines of people queued in front of the gates. 6 female attendants, dressed like the guards, were bringing out large wooden barrels and hundreds of emaciated people. The elderly, the infirm, women and children were waiting their turn to receive porridge. Those who had received their porridge went to a haitang tree by the residence. Beneath it stood a man dressed in white, his long inky hair loosely tied back, passing out protection talismans and patiently repeating instructions. His back was to Moran, so he couldn't see the man's features, but he heard the people who had received the talismans murmuring, "Many thanks for Chu Gongse's kindness, many thanks for Chu Gongse's kindness," as they dispersed. So this was the Governor Gongse? Curious, Moran dragged his little shidi around to get a look at the fellow's face. Just one look, and Moran's eyes were bulging out of their sockets. It was as if he had been struck by lightning. Wasn't that Chuaning? It wasn't just Moran. Chuaning was also gobsmacked. Even though they strained to see him from their place at the end of the line, this Governor Chu Gongse had a lean face with sword-like brows and phoenix eyes, but a gentle curve to the line of his nose. And he even wore all white, just like he did himself. Chuaning was struck dumb. Moran was also struck dumb. After a long while of being frozen stiff, Moran said shakily, "Shidi, Don't you feel like this Chugongse looks just like a certain somebody?" "Like the Yuheng elder," Chuaning said dryly. Moran smacked his own leg. "Right? What's with that? Who is this? What's his relationship with Shizun?" "Why are you asking me? How would I know?" Moran was frantic. "I thought you paid attention in class." "This obviously isn't the content of any class," said Chuaning, irked. Then they fell silent again, scooting forward slowly with the line, both of them staring unblinkingly at the gongse. Upon closer inspection, Chugongse didn't look exactly like Chuaning. The gongse's features were more mild and scholarly. His eyes weren't quite as long and narrow, his pupils were softer, and his gaze was much gentler. Moran stared and stared, then suddenly let out an "Eh?" and turned to look down at his little Shidi. "Let me look at you." "What do you want?" Chuaning turned his face away, ruffled. At this, Moran only grew more persistent, reaching out to grab his face and forcefully turn him back around. He stared for a while, before finally coming to a realization and muttering, "Ah, yeah." Chuaning forced himself to remain calm. "What is it?" Moran narrowed his eyes. No wonder those people outside the city were muttering amongst themselves when they saw you. "I just noticed, but you look kinda like Shizun too." After a long pause, Chuaning hurriedly wrenched himself out of Moran's grip, the tips of his ears turning red. "Nonsense!" "How come those guards noticed immediately, but it didn't occur to me for ages?" Chuaning did not dignify that with a response. In the midst of this puzzlement, the voice of a young child called out, "Papa!"